So we talked about how, in the first part, we talked about how macroeconomics is different from microeconomics. Central government doesn't cannot run out of money because it can print money and borrow as much as it wants from its own central bank. And what is good for you is not good for the country. It would be good for you to save, but if everybody saves, then there would be a recession. So some of these differences between micro and macro, which are important to note. We talked about chartalism, where Georg Knapp's theory of fiat currency, where government creates money, and today there is no limit for a sovereign government when it comes to creating its own currency. You can just create it out of thin air. Money only, not stuff, physical stuff. We are talking about money. And secondly, we talked about Keynes and how he gave birth to macroeconomics, and how macroeconomic principles were used to pull countries out of recession. There was another economist by the name of Abba Lerner who also talked about similar ideas in his functional finance theory, and Keynes also supported that. But these things never got carried to their logical end. They were never carried to their logical conclusion. And Keynes generally stuck to, I think Keynesian theory has been generally used when there is recession and when there is not enough private activity going on. Then government steps in a bit and increases the deficit a bit, spends a bit more money, and that's it. It's not seen as a permanent sort of a thing. Nowadays, this thing has actually been fully developed by new economists who have propounded something called MMT, or modern money or monetary theory. Warren Mosler, Bill Mitchell, Stephanie Kelton, L. Randall Ray, and Pavlina Cherneva are some of these names, and others also. They have written books, and Stephanie Kelton has written a popular book, a bestseller called The Deficit Myth, to propound these ideas. And the idea is, if we use these ideas, that government doesn't have to worry about deficit. There is no such issue of government running out of money. Deficits do not make sense. The deficit of a sovereign government with its sovereign own currency and its debt in its own currency on itself doesn't have any meaning. So you don't have to worry about how much the deficit is, how big it is. I mean, the government's revenue through tax and the government's expenditure, and expenditure minus tax, if it is high, if it is positive, it is deficit. And we worry about, it is too big, the deficit is too big, it is not sustainable, and things are going out of control, and we must have fiscal prudence, and we must not have high fiscal deficits. These are unfounded fears. In India also, long ago, Yashwant Sinha, when he was the finance minister under Vajpayee, there was something called an act, FRBM, Fiscal Responsibility and Budgetary Management Act, that was passed during that government, and when he was the finance minister. And governments have been following that, trying to control fiscal deficit to something like 3% and all that of the budget and all of the GDP, and all that. Now these kinds of figures do not make any sense. Why it is 3%? What will happen if it goes beyond 4? And sometimes there have been some relaxations during pandemic and all, but whenever possible they always try to come back, and they think it is bad that the deficit is high, and they always worry about deficits. So this myth of deficit has not gone away. So modern monetary theory argues, or money theory argues, against this idea. It says that deficits do not matter. The question about government running out of money is silly. Government cannot run out of its own currency, which it can print as much as it wants. So the government doesn't have money to do something or to implement some programs or to pay salaries and all is a stupid thing, because government has an endless pocket. So when government say we don't have money to do this, we want to do certain things but we don't have money, we are a poor country and we don't have money, that is an idiotic thing to say. Government is rich in terms of monetary money capacity. It can create as much money as it wants. So where will the money come from for, if the government wants to do so and such, but where will the money come from? It doesn't have money. So these kinds of arguments and questions and the points are meaningless and stupid. Government can spend as much as it wants because it has the power to issue currency and create currency. The only thing that doesn't mean that there is no problem, and MMT also talks about it. MMT says that the only constraint is real resources, not money, which buys these resources, but the resources themselves. So if you have too much money, if the government creates too much money, spends too much money, which is called a fiscal measure, where it prints money or spends money and uh, runs huge programs, even whether it has tax collections or not. So it it spends a lot of money. If the government spends a lot of money, and if there is so much money available and circulating in the economy, but if you are not able to produce goods and services, because then there is money but there are not enough goods. If your resources are utilized, if there is full employment, if you can't produce more, then just producing and printing money does not make any sense. It will only lead to inflation. So constraint is not money, constraint is real resources, materials, men, food, minerals, machinery, and the processing, the services, and all those kinds of things. So how much resources do you actually have, or you can manage, or you can convert, or you can process, is the cash question, rather than how much money you have. So if you have resources, or if you can mobilize resources, if you can get resources, if you can manage resources, then money is not the issue. So that's one thing that is very important. People criticize MMT that it without understanding this. MMT is not saying that, because MMT is making a distinction between money and what it buys, and the products and services and the goods, the physical real thing. Money is an artificial thing. It's something, some more zeros. It's an artificial construct. It's paper, or it's just an idea. Your bank account, government can simply transfer $1 billion to $1 billion to a bank account with maybe punching some keys. That's it. So there is no real money in that sense. It's just an idea. It's an artificial concept, and so we can't run out of it. But when we actually do that, when we give that money, when we spend that money as a government, would there be a requisite, a proportionate increase in production of goods or services? If not, then there'll be too much money and not enough goods, and that is called inflation, when the prices would rise and the prices would keep on rising. So that is one area where one has to worry about. Otherwise, we don't need to worry about it. And using these ideas, we can increase fiscal, the government can spend money, it can hire people, it can create programs, it can do a lot of public goods, it can do a lot of activities in the public sphere which helps the public. It can build things, it can employ people. We can increase employment and maybe go towards full employment, and stop have not have to have this evil of unemployment or underemployment. So all that is possible, provided we are able to match this uh, production of goods and services and availability of resources to the money supply. Fiscal, in the fiscal sense, money supply also means monetary, where the bank reduces the tax rate, the interest rate goes down. Essentially the money becomes cheaper, taking loans become cheaper and all that. Not that sort of money supply, actual money spent by the government. That is the fiscal measure, not a monetary measure. So modern monetary theory is about fiscal measurement management. Fiscal means things that do have to do with spending by government, earning by government. So taxation, increasing or reducing taxation, taxes is a fiscal part, increasing, reducing expenditure is a fiscal part. Monetary part is when the Reserve Bank of India reduces its interest rate and banks start reducing their interest rates. That is the monetary part. Modern monetary theory and modern money theory focuses more on the fiscal part. Generally we have been focused too much on the monetary part, and it is not as effective as the fiscal part. And one of the things, some people come even in India we have had one success with this, the Narega scheme, Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act and scheme, which was implemented by UPA in the first term, was something like using a Keynesian idea of fiscal expenditure and spending money, something similar to what MMT is saying. And because of that, the government spent a lot of money, and a lot, especially in the rural areas, and they use that money to build check dams, and rural developmental small projects were carried out. So rural people got employment. There was less migration from rural areas to urban areas, or maybe there was some reverse migration from urban to rural, and a lot of money circulated in the rural economy. Of course, there was corruption also. Probably that's something that is likely to happen. There were leakages and all that. But it was a successful scheme, and that's why UPA government came to power. Probably, I think this is one of the reasons, because people saw money, poor people had survived, maybe some made money, and they saw some well-being, economic well-being, and that was one of the reasons that UPA 1 came to power as UPA 2, which they lost in the second term. And then Mr. Modi became the PM. So Narega is an example of using an MMT kind of an idea, which is a Keynesian functional finance MMT idea. MMT is much more bolder. It's all out. It's a permanent thing. It's not just saying that only do it when there is recession and all. Try to achieve full employment, and you can achieve full employment or as close to full employment as possible. Keynes never really pushed it that much. Abba Lerner could not somehow push it through, and they never got beyond doing it only during recession and depression. To get companies out of recession and depression, government expenditure was the thing that they applied, and to get the economy out of the recession. When it was out, then they stopped doing that. So their goal was not full employment. They even didn't think it was possible or desirable or whatever it was. MMT now says, no, we don't have to worry about this deficit at all. Deficits and debt in your own currency on your own government is unimportant, insignificant. That is important to realize. Inflation is important. Inflation has to be looked at. And when you have too much money, inflation could go up. So either by increasing taxes, you can take money out of the system. That is one way of MMT way of saying reducing inflation. And they have other schemes like job guarantee and government employs workers. And when there is inflation, though, they are released back into the private sector. And these kinds of things, they have some measures to contain inflation. But the idea is that it can be managed. It is not impossible. And secondly, when you have large government expenditure, it can have an effect on inflation. Inflation could go up. It could also affect your foreign exchange, exchange rate, basically. Indian rupee vis-a-vis dollar and all that. So if too much rupees and a lot of rupees and not enough dollars, and the rupee will devalue or depreciate and all that. So then you have to look at those aspects also. So it is not that there are no other things that you don't have to worry about. When you increase fiscal measures, when the government spends money, then there are going to be good things, because it doesn't have to worry about this deficit and debt and borrowing and all. So it can spend money, and that would mean that production of goods and services happens, economy grows. There is prosperity, there is employment, reduction in inequality, all those good things happen. And you have to be watchful that inflation doesn't go crazy. And the foreign exchange, you have to look at that part. because then the import exports situation could be a bit complicated. Imports would become costly and all that. So you have to worry about that part. But these things are manageable. It's not impossible to manage. If you apply your mind and if you have policies and systems and structures in place, you can deal with this artificial construct of you can't borrow because you are not earning and you don't have money, so you must first make money. It is inapplicable as far as the government is concerned. It doesn't even apply. It applies to you and me, to private citizens, to private companies, but not to a sovereign government when it is talking about its own currency. So India is a sovereign government with its own currency. So India can learn from MMT and use it. And I seriously believe that the government should look at it, which so far they haven't done that really. And generally everywhere the conservative economists have still not accepted this. Somehow I don't know why. And it is completely obvious that the logic is irrefutable. I mean, you are borrowing from yourself when you talk of deficit. So what does that mean? It is a mythical idea. It doesn't have any sense. It doesn't make any sense. So money as an artificial construct can be created endlessly, limitlessly. There is no end to it. There is no, it is, you can have as much money as you want. The only thing that you have to look at is, do you have resources? You can buy resources that you can buy with that money. Can you supply them? Are they available? Can you produce them quickly enough? Or there is too much money, not enough resources which the money can buy, so the price of the resources goes up, and then you have something like inflation. But just saying that, oh, this will happen and that will happen, and not trying it out is a wrong idea. You must think it through. You must have proper mechanisms in place, and you must try it out, so that we can have a higher GDP growth, which would mean reduced poverty, which would mean better living standards for the poor, reduction in poverty, higher employment. Some people are not employed, underemployed. There is a lot of inequality, so that will go down. Many other things can be provided by the government. Many public works can be done, which the private sector is not doing. So, and we can have better growth, higher growth, equitable growth, and the country would do well. I mean, the people who are not doing well in the country would do reasonably well, and that's what we want, basically. So MMT must be seriously considered. That's what I think. Thank you.